Hi friends, welcome back. Today let's work on a freestyle edit of a family photograph inside Luminar Neo. Now before we jump into the editing, I just want to say a massive heartfelt, sincere thank you so much to everybody who reached out to me after my last video where I kind of had a little mini breakdown on camera, which I was very close to removing from the video, and I'm kind of glad that I left it in because I've never felt so connected to my audience as what I did on that particular occasion, because so many of you who wrote said, I don't normally comment on your videos, but I've watched so many of them. They've been a great help to me. And I just want to say, hope you feel better, get better, all of that good stuff. And I'm pleased to let you know that I am feeling much better about things. And so that's why I'm here hitting record and getting into a photo edit inside of Luminar Neo. And it's going to be one of the freestyles because you guys often say we prefer the freestyle approach, and you can learn along with me if I make mistakes. You're looking at my mistakes as I make them and maybe how I correct them as well. So let's load up a photo and get into the edit. So the photos that you can see here in this folder were all taken at Lake Tekapo in New Zealand, and we had a skiing trip around that area. And while we were there, a friend of mine took some nice family photos of us. He is a professional portrait photographer, so it was really nice to actually get some images of my wife and kids with me actually in them. And here are my kids with his kids. So this was one I took, and personally I prefer the frame that actually showcases the mountains in the background. These are all unedited, whereas he took a slightly higher angle photographing us and we just get the floor. So not judging his expertise, but I would have preferred a lower camera angle from himself looking up towards us. It would have picked up the mountains. But I've honestly got nothing but gratitude for actually having a photograph of myself with my family. It means the world to me. And so let's have a look at how we can actually edit this photo and get it looking its best. So before we begin any photo edit, my recommendation is that you cast your eye over the photo and you actually have a game plan of what you want to achieve. You look for the flaws in the photo that you want to correct. So first of all, if we look at the background, we can see that we are bleached out on the snow up here. It's gone to pure white, and by the looks of things, it doesn't look like we're actually going to be able to retrieve any information in those blown out highlights. Coming down from that, I find that the grasses that are poking out, the kind of tepid yellowy browns that we see here, I find that they may just be a little bit of a clash and potentially a distraction behind us. So that's something to bear in mind. If we also just stick with the background, we can see we've got a lot of blue tonality in the shadows of the snow. We've also got a little bit of my glasses sticking out from behind my legs here, where I would have taken them off, just hidden them behind me. And as is often the case when you take photographs of people and they're holding something and you say, hey, can you lose the thing that you're holding? They will often tuck them behind themselves, but not realize that they're still poking out. And I've been guilty of that myself there. You can also see that my wife has her phone in her lap as well, but I don't think I'm going to worry about that. Now, aside from photographic technicalities, such as the fact we're slightly underexposed, and I want to brighten that up, one thing that I find really breaks from a sense of unity in this image is all of the different colours that we have going on. So if we look at the side of my jacket, we've got this big orange fleck here. My daughter's coat has this kind of maroony colour. We've got turquoise and blues in my wife's hat, a big bright blue hood that my son is wearing, and we've got these reddy magenta hues in the laces and shoes of my wife as well. And so the differences in those higgledy-piggledy colours may not have really drawn your attention to start with, but once you see them, you can't unsee them. And I really want to create a sense of harmony within the colour scheme in that photo. So I think a lot of the heavy lifting we'll be undertaking in this photo will be trying to unify those colours. So we'll look at some tools inside Luminar Neo that will allow us to do that. Okay, let's get into the basic corrections. I'm going to open up the Develop Raw tool because that is the place we want to start, and I'm going to select a camera matching profile. So I'm going to jump down to Camera Neutral, Camera Portrait, Camera Standard, and just have a look how they're looking. Usually I like to start with a camera neutral profile because it does give you access to a wider dynamic range, and I have put a video together on how to actually apply camera matching profiles, so I'll put a link to that in the description below. But for this one, I'm actually going to start with a camera standard profile rather than the basic camera neutral, because it's just giving us a little bit more pop, a little bit more contrast, and why not? We'll just start with something that's just a little bit different. I'm going to boost up the exposure, and at the moment I'm keeping my eye on the exposure of the people in the photograph. So probably about a half stop bump would be good. Now I'm going to grab the smart contrast slider and just have a little play with that. I don't really want to push that too far at the moment. But one thing I do want to do is grab the highlight slider and pull that down and see if we can't recover the information in the snow behind us. I don't think it's vitally important for this photo, and if I double click you'll see it just goes back to pure bleached white. But we want to tread carefully, because as I pull this down and we get our details back here, we're going to bring down any highlights in the portrait itself. So I'll double click and you'll see that we just lose a little bit of interest in those highlights. However, what I like to do is actually start from a place where we have the maximum information in our photo, and so that involves recovering as best we can this information in the snow up here. We just have a little bit of detail brought back, and we can always reintroduce brightness into our faces later. But if we start with a place where we have no detail in the snow, once we leave this develop raw tool here, there is no way to recover that. So we want to make sure that we bring those highlights back. Now, because we started with a more contrasty profile, the camera standard, I'm just going to boost these shadows up so that we can actually start to see into the clothing here. Obviously, I don't want to take it that high, but I would like to see a bit of information in this shadow area. Okay, I'm just going to press J on my keyboard, and that's going to allow me to see the highlight peaking. So you can see where this red area is here, that is basically showing me I've blown out to pure white. So I cannot recover that area. If I double click the highlights, you'll see what it looks like without that highlight recovery. So we are bringing information back, but we're still not quite there. But I don't mind, because potentially I'm going to crop the top of this photo off anyway. If I was getting really fussy about the framing, we would have the same amount of space above our heads to the top of the frame as we do from our feet to the bottom, but currently there's not as much space down here in the foreground as there is at the top, so potentially I may be cropping this down at the end anyway. Now I'm just going to make sure that my black and white points are set properly. So if I start bringing the blacks down, what I want to do is actually just start seeing where these blue highlight warnings, shadow warnings start appearing, telling me that we're clipping out detail in our black. But if you see that I'm just starting to see it there in the gloves, look how dirty and muddy the photo starts to look. It's because using this slider, we actually crush down the left-hand side of the histogram in trying to achieve pure black. And for me, that's not an ideal way to do it. So I'm going to double click and reset that. We now don't have our pure blacks, so what I prefer to do is do it through the curves section here. So we'll open that up, and now by grabbing the bottom left node, whatever, controlling point for the curve, what I'm going to do is just keep it along the bottom here and slide it across to the right hand side. And now when I start getting black in the gloves, like in the little seams between the fingers, we're seeing that we're hitting pure black because we have that J key pressed that's showing us our warnings to say we are now clipping those blacks. So we know we now have a pure black point in our photo. But unlike last time, when the left-hand side of the histogram was getting completely crushed down, we're not doing that anymore. We have a linear distribution of the information through the curve. Might be getting a little bit too technical, but just trust me, you're much better off to actually grab this left-hand point and bring that over until you just start to see those little blue warnings appear, and you know you've got a pure black without doing what happens when you crush the black slider down, and that is making everything look very dark and very muddy. We don't want to do that. Okay, we're going to scroll down to the color balance here, and I'm pretty happy with the temperature as it was shot, but if we have a little tweak, a little play with this, we can see the different effect that we can get as we move this slider. I've finished fine-tuning my highlights and shadows, so I'm going to press J just to get rid of the highlight and shadow clipping warnings. And now I'm going to grab the color saturation slider and just give it a boost up, just so that we're actually starting with a more saturated photo, and then we can desaturate the areas where we don't want to see as much color. But I just feel like our faces were just looking a little bit washed out. Well, three of the faces anyway. My face is already ultra saturated. I kind of have a default red tomato face, so it'll give us an opportunity to see if we can't dial back the redness in my skin tone and get it to match more accurately the rest of my family's faces. So we'll crank that saturation slider up a little more aggressively than I may normally, but the benefit of that is as I start to work with the color and reduce certain colors, manipulate the hues, you're going to see it more clearly in the video. So sharpness is the next thing we want to look at, and as I zoom in we can see that it is just a little bit soft, and I really like Luminar's default sharpening settings, so I'm just going to apply a little bit of that. I don't know, maybe we'll go just a little bit more aggressively, but as I do that you start to see some of the digital noise appear, but we'll just counteract that with the luminosity slider. That's probably softened things a bit too far. Yeah, something like that's about right. Let's just do a little toggle of before and after just to check we're happy with that. And that's looking much better already. Usually it's good practice just to make sure that you've turned on auto defringing, distortion corrections, things like that. And if you don't have access to these corrections, which is a question I get asked sometimes, and why don't I have access to the profile drop-down slider? You only get that if you are working in Develop Raw. The program has to have access to the raw data to be able to correct for lens distortion, things like that. Anyway, let's move on. Enhance AI is usually a great tool, at least to play around with. You know, you might not want to apply it, and very rarely at 100%, but at least just having a little play with this very powerful slider, you can see what it's doing for you. And it's kind of enhancing so much in this photo, but to a hideous amount. But what it is doing, if you look at the highlight in the background that we'd kind of lost earlier, as I bring that up, we are starting to see more of that detail. So maybe we want to bring a little bit of this in. How about we set it to 32, and I'll grab my mask and I'll just brush some in, and we'll keep the strength at around 50%, so we're getting half of the effect. So as soon as I click, we're going to lose the effect that we applied, and now we're only going to see it once I release my mouse so that we can actually see where I've painted. We're going to have this effect introduced. So if I toggle the before and after, it's just bringing a bit of information into that snow. Probably not super helpful, but look, let's put a little bit of this effect over us and just see what it's doing. It's not really adding much benefit to us, but if you are going to have a play around with sliders, that is one that I certainly recommend. Just grab it, see what it's doing for you, because you never know, it might be bringing out detail, enhancing areas that you hadn't even thought of enhancing. In this case, not so much. So we'll move on. Now, Structure AI is another slider I really recommend just grabbing and bringing that up and seeing what it does for you. So if we toggle our before and our after, it's going to bring detail to the clothes, it's going to bring detail to the background, but I don't want the background distracting our viewer's eye from the lovely portrait of me and my family. So what could I do? Rather than actually increasing this slider, what we could do is take it in the negative direction, and that is going to soften up all of the background there. So if I see before and after, you can see that not only is it softening the background, it's also smoothing our skin slightly as well. Again, don't want to be playing around with this at -100, but it's a good idea to just throw it all the way to the extremes so that we can actually see exactly what it is doing for us. But you'll recall when I analysed the photo to start with, I said that the grasses behind us might be just a little bit distracting. So the fact that we could soften those up might play into our benefit. So what I'm going to do is come into the masking section, and we want to just reveal this only in the background. We don't want it put onto our family. The skin softening isn't the right way to do skin softening. Our clothes have all got soft, and the snow in the foreground has lost detail as well. So let's use Mask AI to get rid of it from those areas. So I'm going to come over and click the Human tab, and hopefully Luminar Neo is going to do a good job of masking us out. Let's see. And I'm very happy with that. I thought the fact that there was 4 of us in a big kind of blob of people, then the AI may struggle to actually mask us accurately, but it looks like it's done a great job, and it's also masked the hair as well. So this is a really good starting point. Currently we have a positive mask, i.e. the effect that we created with Structure AI is going to be revealed where we see the red mask. So I need the opposite of that. So we need to invert what we currently have. So to get the opposite of any mask that you have, what we need to do is come out of those mask options, and currently it is selected. We have the negative Structure AI applied where we saw that red masking, but we're going to come to Mask Actions, and if we show the mask, we will now be able to see when I click Invert, we're going to get the opposite of that. And that is exactly what we want. So if I come back to the Structure AI tool or close that down, it's been taken away from us and left only on the background. But you'll recall I also didn't really want it on the foreground, and probably want it just sort of feathered off into the background. So let's find that tool again, which has now moved into the Edits tab because we closed it down. That's where it jumps to. We'll come into Masking, and I'm coming to the brush, and I just want to erase the mask from down the bottom here. So I'm going to click and start painting, and currently we are painting with that 50% strength again, and I think that's absolutely fine for this example. My red face and glowing ear we will deal to shortly. However, for now, let's just come down and work with the portrait tools. So The thing I was thinking of diving into was the skin AI, but as I've jumped into the portrait tools here, the first thing, portrait bokeh AI, it's made me realize I've missed a trick. I could have been using this tool instead of structure AI used in a negative direction. So as you can see, as I crank that amount to 100, we are creating a fake bokeh look. So that's emulating, you know, a shallow depth of field on our lens. And that's helping to separate my family from the background even more. So if I just toggle the before and then the after, you can see exactly what that's doing. Because we have already used that negative structure AI to blur the background, I won't go too heavy-handed with that, but look, it's right there. We might as well use it, and shame on me for not even thinking of that in the first place. I'll be honest, on one hand, while I'm really enjoying working in Luminar Neo again, I'm actually a little bit rusty because I did take close to a month off, something like that, from that last video I posted. A lot of you recommended in your comments that, yeah, take some time for yourself, get your head right. I'm still a work in progress, but baby steps, and being away from editing for a little while, just having a complete break has been quite liberating and a breath of fresh air for me. So yeah, I'm peeling the rust back a little bit. So rookie mistake going for the negative structure AI when being a portrait. I could have used bokeh AI, but hey, you know, like I say, freestyle edit, we're learning together. Let's get into sorting this skin out. Okay, we'll zoom into my face, seeing as that is the one that needs the most work. And as I'm moving this photo around, the re-rendering that Luminar Neo normally does, and you see the pop from a more pixelated version when you're moving around the zoom like this, back to the sharper version that has our processing applied, is taking a lot longer than it normally does on my system, which is telling me that I'm probably in need for a new computer. So that is something I've been wanting to do for a little while. My current system's about 4 years old, so while it was pretty high-end when I actually built it, it might just be showing its age already. So look, I'm going to push the amount all the way to 100 and also turn on the skin defects removal. And as you can see on the side of my wife's face just here, when it finally pops, that is not what I want to do. It's actually smearing some of her hair across her face. Sometimes the AI doesn't get it right, sometimes it makes mistakes, but you know, you might as well have a play around and see whether you like what it's doing. But look, the fact I've put that to 100% is fine, because what I'm going to do, although that skin smoothing might be considered a little over the top, we can use a mask and then just brush it in only where we want it. So I'm going to use my bracket keys, my left bracket key, to reduce the size of my brush, and then click and start painting. And so I can put some of that skin smoothing over my forehead. Definitely need it around the side of my eyes. Look at those old crinkly buggers. Try and see if we can't sort them out just a little bit. You know, I don't need to go too crazy with this effect. Let's have a little look at the before and after. Before and after. It's very, very subtle indeed. Let's do the same on my wife as well. Don't tell her that I've done this. You know, you just got to tell her that she's got perfect skin. No, you still look 20 and beautiful, darling. Don't worry about it. So let's just apply a little bit of that before and after. And in terms of skin smoothing on the kids, I'm going to put just a little bit on there, not because I feel like their skin needs smoothing in any way. They have the most perfect skin, being young and sprightly like they are, but just because there's just a little bit of mottling from the digital noise, so the skin smoothing can just help with that just a little bit. Now, these changes that I've made are super, super subtle. And if you really wanted to, you could close down the Skin AI tool and go again for a second round, so you could apply more Skin AI over the top of what you've already done. But another thing that we could do if we wanted to, just to clean up the skin, is actually use the clone tool here, and rather than having a percentage set way high at 100, sort of bring that down, I don't know, 15%, something like that. We can clone a section of skin that is nice and smooth, and then we can paint it over the top of areas where we've got darkened shadows, like under my eyes there, or on the side of the nose where my glasses have been pinching in. Now, everything's just gone really pixelated at the moment. As well as my computer getting older, I'm running out of RAM on my system, and I've also got a few programs running in the background at the moment. A lot going on. I'm demanding a lot of my computer, as is the case when you're using AI technology. It is very processor and system intensive, and so if you want to run Luminar Neo at its optimum, make sure you don't have other stuff running in the background like I have. I'll close that down. But also, if you're using an older and less capable machine, don't have really high expectations of super fast performance, AI computations do take some time, so you need a bit of patience. And if you want to get Luminar Neo and you don't have it, please use the link in the description of my video. It helps me out to get a small commission from that, and it does help me just keep creating this free content. It sort of justifies my time away from my family to do this. So yeah, if you like the look of it and don't have it yet, use that link. I've got discount code as well. Right, let's get back to seeing if we can't sort me out, and let's start dealing with colors. So I'm going to close the clone tool down. I'm going to change my zoom to fit to screen, and it's probably worth having a quick look where we've come from and where we've got to. So here's our before and here's our after. So let's start seeing if we can pull back some of these distracting color elements. And the tool that we're going to use to do that is the color tool inside of the Essentials tab here. So if I crank the saturation all the way to 100, that's a good idea if you're working with color, just to see more clearly what the offending colors are. So it's really easy to see that, first of all, we have quite a blue cast that's evident over the clothes here. That is because the sun is behind us and we are actually being lit by the ambient reflection off of the snow, which is reflecting the sky, which is blue. So no surprises there. So we could sort that out if we want to. So now we know what colors are in the scene, we can now come in to try and remove those color casts. Of course, we have the remove color cast slider, so it's worth just having a play with that and just see if we like what it's doing. So here's our before, here's our after, before and after. Absolutely, it's recognizing that there's too much blue in the scene and is trying to counteract that by the addition of yellow. But personally, I don't really like what it's doing. It's not very refined. So we're better off jumping into the HSL section, which is hue, saturation and luminance, so we can now control specific colors. And probably the easiest one to start working with is the blue. So rather than changing the color value of the blue, let's actually change its saturation. So if I grab the blue saturation and bump it up, we can see, oh yeah, there is a lot of blue. There's in the snow, in my jacket. Let's grab it and start bringing that down and actually subtract the blue. So as a consequence of taking it all the way to 0, we've killed any sort of life in the snow, we've made it a horrible grey, and we don't want to just completely destroy the colour in a photo, but just control it. So I'm going to just bring it down to a point where I feel it looks good on our bodies and on our clothes, reducing that blue saturation, but I don't want it affecting the snow. So again, we can come in, use our masking tools, jump into Mask AI, and we can just select the human option. And by doing that, it's just going to reveal the blue again in the snow itself. And to get a look at that, let's just close that tool down. And now if we look in the edit section so we can see the before and after, you can see that that's really helped kind of neutralize that vibrant blue look that we had going on. So now let's have a look if we can't deal with this really ghastly orange strip on the side of my jacket. So let's jump into the tool section again. We're going to use the same kind of method. So we want to speak into this kind of reddy orange zone here. So I'm going to come over here and again, saturation wise, let's grab the red saturation. Let's grab the orange. Yeah. Bring that down. And just around the seam here, we may just have a little bit of magenta going on, and we can pull that out as well. And if I zoom back out, you can obviously see that that has also affected all of our skin tones, which isn't what we want. So this time we just want to create a mask, but we can be a lot more localized with it and just brush it in. I want to make sure I'm doing that with 100%. And I'm just going to click and paint over this area here. And just like that, we've removed that orange fleck from the side of my jacket. Using the same principle, we could take a look at seeing if we could actually correct. I say correct, the color is currently correct. What I mean is harmonize the color of my daughter's jacket. So we're going to open up the color section again. We obviously have the hue shift, which is going to shift every single hue in the photo. So as you move that around, you might think that that would be a good option for correcting a color. You know, like you don't like a particular color, let's just move it to a new hue. But the problem is, when you start to actually paint that color back in, you're gonna bleed over the edge potentially and introduce colors that you don't want. So rather than using that hue shift, it's usually better to actually speak directly into the color that you want to affect. So in this case, we're looking at probably purple and magenta. So I want to bring the purples down. That's neutralized it, and the magenta as well. Let's take it all the way, and potentially she might have a bit of blue in there. Yep, let's bring that down. And if you're not using your masks, you can see how it negatively affects other areas of the photo. So like my forehead here, my wife's lips, that's all been affected as well. So what we want to do is just come in and actually paint that effect only where we want it. So I'll just go over any of the colors on her gloves and her jacket. And because we've only spoken into those particular colors, the purples and magentas, we don't need to be super accurate with our mask. And I've just noticed that there is a little bit of purple down here as well. So let's just paint over that to remove that. What about if we go over the laces? Okay, that's not really going to do it for the laces, so I'm going to press Ctrl-Z to undo. And if you guys haven't updated to Luminar version 1.9 yet, you certainly want to look at doing that. This is 1.91 because they have introduced undo, so Ctrl-Z to undo any mistakes that we're making during the editing process across all tools. That is finally there, so I'm really pleased to see that. Should have been there when they first released the program, but it wasn't. It is now, so I'm happy it is. And actually, while we're on that, I'm just going to say it. So often when I say anything positive about Luminar, Luminar Neo or Skylum, somebody will be in the comments going, "You must be on their payroll to be saying something positive." No, if I was on, like, I want to keep my channel as open for integrity and my honest opinion as I possibly can. If I'm on anyone's payroll, I can't do that. And so I've had so many offers from people getting in contact about other software and things saying, "We would like you to be an ambassador, sponsor you," all of that. And I've turned it down so that I can just be impartial and say what I want to say. Like, they should have had the undo feature built into Neo from the start, and I've got no qualms saying that. Does my head in when people are making comments and they don't know what they're talking about. Talking of comments, yeah, so grateful for all the positive comments that you guys left in my last video. Honestly, I was so touched. But in amongst all of that, I get one, "Real men don't cry." It's like, what do you do with troll comments like that? And it's funny because there's so many positive comments, yet my brain kept focusing on that one negative comment, thinking, who leaves a nasty comment like that? Obviously a real man. Anyway, let's get back to this edit. So the process here is going to be exactly the same, where I'm just going to dial into maybe the magentas. Actually, rather than reducing the saturation, let's actually change this color. So we're going to push it more towards the blues because we do have blue in this photo. So the purples, I'm going to take those more in that direction. Magentas, let's push that over, and the reds as well. No, we're not able to actually do that through shifting the hues here. So I may have to come down to the big hue shift slider. And you can see that I can actually remap those reds into more of a bluey purple kind of tone. But as I'm doing that, I'm also remapping the other colors. And so what looked like a neutral blacky gray before is now taken on a rather ghastly green color, which is not what I want. And so if I wanted to change the color of those laces like that, I can do it, but I would need to come in and actually mask that in only where I want it. And that is probably going to be a little bit more time consuming than I would want. So, you know, if I was to roughly paint over this like I'd roughly painted over those other areas, I'm going to start introducing that green as well. But I'm just wondering whether we actually come in to the saturation slider, grab the greens and reduce it, and whether we can actually kill that discoloration there. And the answer to that is no, we cannot. But the reason we're not actually able to reduce that by reducing the green slider is because these sliders are actually talking to the color that existed before the hue color shift. So it's actually the blue that existed that it is remapping into green. And so if I actually reduce the saturation of the blue, because we've now shifted the hue, it is it's getting complicated, but we can remove that green cast by reducing the blue there. And now that's going to allow us to more roughly come in and just paint that mask over the top so we can recolor all of this pattern on the shoe without turning our shoe green. There we go. So let's see our before and our after. Problem solved. We could also come in and just sort my son's hood out as well and just jump into the saturation of the blue hood and just reduce it. I don't feel like I need to remove it completely, just reduce it. Before and after. And now let's see whether we can't just make my pink face a little bit more orangey. So I'm going to come into the saturations, and let's just see what happens as I desaturate the red. I mean, the fact that that's actually just changing just shows you that yes, absolutely, there's a lot of red in my face. So we're just going to bring that down, maybe counterbalance that by boosting the oranges up slightly. And let's also jump into the hue itself, and the reds, we are actually going to shift them over towards the orange spectrum. Probably still too much color in my cheeks, and maybe that exists in the magenta. Let's see, let's bring that down. Yeah, that's starting to reduce that. Certainly not perfect, but what we can do now is just mask that in only where we want it. And so by doing that with a strength around 50 again, I can just build the effect up. So a little bit over my forehead, certainly want to tone down my big glowing ear, and my cheeks. It is very often my cheeks that get very red, and a little bit on my neck as well. So now if we zoom out and we do a little comparison of our skin color and tone, and we look at the before and after, you can see it's pretty subtle, but as I release this so we can see the after, we've just toned down all of that bright red tomato glow. Okay, our palette's looking pretty much harmonized now, but what I did with the laces before, it's just a little bit excessive. So what we can do is come in, grab that blue and the purple as well, and just bring that saturation down. I may even just grab the hue slider to push the purple more in towards a blue, because currently it was quite pinky purple. If I grab the purple and drop it left, that's going to push that more towards a blue. And then we can use the saturation slider on both the blue and the purple just to reduce the saturation value in those shoes. Okay, before and after. Okay, masking coming in. We can paint that quite strongly. Okay, there's a couple of things that I still want to do. One is a have to do, and the other thing is a nice to do, or at least playtime. So I have to get the clone tool and remove some of those mud patches and the glasses that's poking out from between my legs. Just remove that, clean it up, and it's going to make the image look much more tidy and finished. From there, we might just throw some of the more creative tools in Luminar Neo at it, including my favorite one, you guys know what that is, just to see if it can't just elevate the image to that very next level. Might be overkill, but you got to play around with this stuff, right? And just see if you like the results. But let's get the clone tool and tidy up the snow. So I'm going to come down here. It's the very bottom tool, clone. And now, unlike when I was retouching the faces, we don't want the strength low. We want it 100%, because I don't want to like sample from an area of snow, you know, down here and paint over the snow and have some of it just peeking through. I want to get rid of it completely. And so the idea when you're cloning, the best way to do it is to look for an area that would not look out of place, replaced over the top of the thing you're trying to get rid of. So for example, I want to get rid of this bit of snow just here. I'm going to click just to the right on a ridge, because the mud or clump, whatever it is, exists on a ridge. So when I paint that in, we still have a kind of ridge effect going on there. So I'm just going to work my way around this photo and just kind of clean up some of these marks by using the Alt key to click where I want to sample from. So I'm holding Alt on my keyboard, click down here, and then I'm going to bring my mouse up, click over the mud, and just start painting over the top. Same here, I'm just clicking from a sample point, and you can see that I've actually not really done a very good job there, so we can either use the undo that's been introduced or just go over the top of that extra bit I introduced. But when you're finding an area to sample from, one thing to keep in mind is you want to keep the same kind of value, as in the brightness level that you're sampling and replacing, and also the same color. And the other thing is make sure you're sampling from an edge if you're going to paint out from an edge. So you can see that I've sampled some of my trousers here. So if I started painting that there, you're going to see that we're stealing from this area and painting it here. I'm going to press Ctrl-Z to undo that. But using that concept, what I can do is sample the edge of my trousers here and bring that down to where the glasses poke out. And now I can actually paint out, and we haven't like destroyed the edge of the trousers. And if there's bits we don't like, we can again sample from other areas, but you know, that's a pretty good cleanup. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, so I'll close the clone tool down and just have a play around with some of these other tools here. So we have high key, so we can grab that. That's going to give a very distinctive look to our photo, very crisp, very white, which might just help to imbue that sense of cold snowiness, you know, if we see our before and after. It's also desaturating the photo as well. But look, I quite like the color that I've introduced, so I don't want to kill it too much. But if you remember at the beginning, I did actually boost the saturation plus 35, I think it was. So by adding in some high key that's going to just drop those saturations back down again, I don't think that's too bad of a thing. So here's our before, here's our after. Okay, what else? We're going to jump into the creative section, and the dramatic tool does a similar thing to the high key tool. So if I crank that all the way up, I don't want to apply this, but I'm just showing you it's a similar look to what we just had before with the high key. So I'm not going to use that, but one tool I definitely want to at least have a play around with is Mystical. You guys know I love that. So let's crank that up all the way to 100. Gives this kind of soft ethereal glow to the whole photo. 100, way too much, never want to do that. But let's ease it back to about 20. Have a little toggle of before and after, and it just softens the photo up. And for portraits, I think that's a really nice addition to your photo, before and after. And I'm not sure it's going to work, but I'm going to try a bit of toning, because I'm thinking we have gone quite monochromatic now that I've reduced all of the saturation in our clothes. And so perhaps it might help just to add maybe some blue into the shadows. So as I crank this up, it's set already as default at red. So what I want to do is just grab that slider and start moving that over until I start hitting the blues. Maybe a bluey purple might be quite nice. And then in the highlights, we could do the same, but go the opposite way. So instead of blue this time, we're going to put some orange in there. So we're using the complementary color. Don't want to have it 100. Again, it helps though, just so we can see exactly what color we're introducing. Because if you had your saturation just sat around at 15 and you started moving this around, it's actually very hard to see exactly what's going on. Whereas when we have it that set to 100, you can't mistake what color you're actually introducing into those highlights. And so that's easier to pinpoint the value you want for the hue. And then when you've got that sat where you want it, you can then crank the saturation up to a level that you're happy with. And now I'm going to bring the overall amount slider, I don't know, somewhere around 27. Let's have a little toggle of before and after. It's very, very subtle, but I just like that extra layer of enhancing those complementary colors. So the blues in the shadows, orange in the highlight. We've got color harmony going on once we originally sorted out all that mismatch of colors. So there's quite a lot of work involved in getting those colors where I wanted them to. But let's have a look at our before and after, and hopefully it's been worthwhile taking that color palette into something that's more controlled. Because if you're going to put this photo, let's say, up on your wall as a large print, something like that, you don't want those distractions, because every time you look at that photo, it's going to annoy you. So the mud in the snow, things like that, every time I look at it, it would annoy me. And so you really want to go that extra mile if you're printing a piece of work. And what is more valuable putting up on your wall than your family, the people that you love? So it's worth spending the time. Let's look at the before and after. And I'll press the / key on my keyboard, and now we can see the unedited raw version straight out of camera. And here is our processed version. So here's our before, here's our after. Before and after. So I said this is a freestyle. This hasn't worked out perfectly. I like it, but I feel that in my pursuit of neutralizing the palette and also adding that kind of blue toning to the shadows, I've cooled this off just a little bit too much. So I'm going to jump back to the develop tool, but put it on the top of the stack. So it's over all of these edits that we've already done, and just warm this photo back up just a little bit. So I'm going to jump into the develop tool, come down, and I'm going to grab this temperature slider, introduce a bit of warmth, don't need to do too much, and maybe pop in a little bit of magenta as well. Let's have a little toggle before and after, before and after. Oh, I'm not sure which one I prefer, whether we embrace the coolness of being on a mountain surrounded by snow and go for a more bluey look, or whether I fight against it and say I like my portraits to be a bit warmer and have that sense of warmth. Which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Hopefully you won't be waiting as long. I feel like I might have got my mojo back enough to be hitting record and get back into the photos. Life is good. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.